Hello, friends, and welcome to another John in Theory. And I'm John Negroni, and this week I want to talk about Deadpool 2. And I struggled a little bit with what this conversation would be about because I've reviewed the film already for my podcast, Cinemaholics. We had a good discussion about it. We talked about the things we like. We said all the things you expect to hear in reviews. It was fun. I liked the characters. It's not a perfect film. You've heard all of these things before. Really, you could listen to any review of anything and just put the pieces together. I don't need this. So, that's not what I'm here to do right now. This is a bit more of a spoilery take on Deadpool 2, the new superhero movie from Fox. And if you are looking for a Deadpool kind of review, something that's a little bit more of like, is this good, is this bad? And why or why not, that's not really what I'm going for here. And I am going to spoil basically anything you can imagine in Deadpool 2. I don't even know for sure what I'm going to spoil yet. I haven't even gotten myself to that place. But I do know what I want to talk about is maybe something about the movie that explains a little bit why I'm not as positive on Deadpool 2 as a lot of my critic friends. I know a lot of people who really love this movie, and I feel bad for not being as in the know on that. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that some of the experience that I had while watching this movie, the thoughts I had, and maybe that will illuminate for some listeners and viewers, depending on how you come into contact with me. Why I'm at where I'm at. A couple things to get out of the way. Yes, I'm recording this. I don't have anything figured out. Okay, look, the behind me stuff, I don't know. I don't care. This is stuff in my room. This is as unprofessional as it gets. Yeah. I'm wearing sunglasses indoors. I don't even know why. This started out as I had to have the sunglasses because I was recording in my car. And it was too bright. I needed it, and now it's kind of become a shtick. I don't want to get rid of it. I like these sunglasses a lot, and I don't like people kind of realizing how my eyes kind of go everywhere. So that's all well and good. That's an explanation that'll have to serve for now. So let's talk about Deadpool 2. Now, there's a reason I called this the Tao of fanboyism. Now, what is a Tao? People kind of just say Tao these days. I don't really know what it means. A Tao is an absolute principle. And when I was watching Deadpool 2, there weren't a lot of principles or ideas that I thought were very consistent because things happen that kind of contradict other things that we're told to believe and shown to believe about who this character Deadpool is, what he's trying to learn and accomplish, and what ultimately happens as a result through the plot and story. And what I've come to find is that the Tao of Deadpool 2 is that there kind of is none. And I'm going to explain that in a second. It's not a cop-out, I promise. Let's slow down, though, because I want to make sure that I'm very clear on what I'm talking about here. If you look at the first Deadpool was a parody of the superhero genre. That story, that movie itself, it was trying to subvert the genre. It was talking about the genre. The story was about superhero movies. You understood Deadpool and the humor it was going for by understanding that it was lampooning superheroes. It's a big reason why a lot of people love it. It's a big reason why I really liked it when I first saw it. A little bit bored kind of the second time. I don't know why yet. And I watched it recently, rewatched it recently. And that's what it was trying to do. And in Deadpool 2, we have something different. We have a superhero movie that is now lampooning the genre's fans. The fanboy in general. If you watch Deadpool 2, and we're into spoilers now, you were warned. This is a movie where it is actually trying to subvert it's talking to the fan. It's subverting what we believe to be true about fans of superhero movies. The movie is talking at me. It's talking at you, somebody who is willing to watch this video in the first place because it is about a movie that you're interested in at the very least, and you kind of want to hear some dissection. So specifically, let me define what I mean by all this because I kind of have to, be clear. Fan service in Deadpool 2 is more than just making jokes about superhero movies. It is taking the tropes of a sequel, what we normally see in the sequel to a superhero movie, and it's doing something different with it. That's all. It's On the same note, it is doing something very similar that we've seen in other sequels. Deadpool 2 is very complicated. It's bigger than the first Deadpool. There are a lot more characters. And it's going for kind of a deeper story. It's not an origin story this time. And so they had a little bit more collective freedom to do what they will. But at the same time, the story is not nearly as tight or focused as in the first Deadpool. The first Deadpool was very simple. It was very, it was a love story between Wade Wilson and Vanessa. And in this new movie, Vanessa dies in the first act. And yes, they do the fridged girlfriend trope, and they actually, that's not even being parodied here, which I found surprising. I thought they were trying to trope that and parody it, and it just wasn't successful because it was so on the nose. It wasn't subverted. Like, there was nothing. She just dies. And that's not a great look. If you're unfamiliar, the fridge girlfriend trope is the idea that a lot of screenwriters in Hollywood, they use the death of a girlfriend or a daughter, a female character, in order to spur the male character to action. It's considered a trope. It's considered a cliche, honestly, more than a trope, because as cliches go, it's just overused to the point where, as Deadpool himself might say, it's lazy writing. So that said, that's one of many things that this sequel does that is very confusing to me, because the story itself, what it's trying to say, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm still working my way through this, but I'll give an example here. The real plot of Deadpool 2 doesn't really kick in until we're about halfway into the movie. That's about the time when Cable actually shows up. He hasn't showed up at this point. And I'd say about maybe a third in the movie, we're introduced to this Fire Fist character. He's played by something Dennison. I forget the child's name. He was in Hunt for the Wilder People. And he is this kind of this mad kid, very angry, but we find out he's been dealing with abuse from this orphanage for a long time. And that is why he's sort of lashing out. And as I came to see from the movie, this kid is sort of an avatar for the angry fanboy. And a lot of Deadpool 2 is talking about how fan service is becoming toxic, and how we shouldn't be surprised, I guess, that someone would come from the future and say, whoa, hey, look, like, this may not seem like this Gamergate fanboyism kind of thing. It may not seem like the biggest deal right now, something that we need to prioritize, but it's something that if we don't nip in the bud right now, if we don't find a way to like get rid of this toxic fan culture, fanboyism, then we're going to be doomed. Terrible stuff's going to happen. People are actually going to get hurt. And Deadpool 2 proceeds to be a movie about how Deadpool himself, who, again, he's the avatar of the movie, he's somebody who doesn't even like the fanboy, this Fire Fist character, this character who likes Deadpool eventually, who wants to be friends with Deadpool, who, as we see the two of them interact, he wants to be accepted by Deadpool, but Deadpool's like, I'm not your friend. This is a very subtle, but I believe intentional portrayal or illustration of the relationship between the people who make movies, the creators, and the people who appreciate them, the fans. And you can actually see an interesting through line of the movie through the relationship between Wade Wilson and this young kid, Fire Fist. I forget if he had like a name in the movie. I'm just going back to Fire Fist over and over again, so I apologize for not being, again, precise. So that's kind of how we can go forward with this movie and what it's trying to say. Now, my big issues with the film, and a thing that it just baffles me that this film doesn't reckon with the gun violence. I mean, we're talking about a self-aware movie about meta stuff. We're talking about a character who breaks the fourth wall. We're talking about a character who his mission throughout the movie is to redeem a fanboy, to sort of educate a fanboy that, hey, like, don't take the abuse, the bullying that, you have been receiving, the problems you've been receiving. Don't repay that out as vengeance to other people. That's not what you should do. Creating more violence, it's bad, all of that stuff. The problem is, this lesson that Deadpool is supposedly either learning or sort of projecting onto this kid, he doesn't follow himself or seem to have any understanding of. The movie never addresses this because, again, Deadpool is all like, you shouldn't be violent. You shouldn't just murder people. He spends 99% of Deadpool 2 and the first Deadpool murdering people. And it's never brought up. It's never sort of, I talked about this with my Loki video. This idea that like a character who murders somebody and just sort of, it's very passe, it's very passive. And there's no reckoning with that. There's no exploration of that, how it might be affecting Deadpool himself. He just does it, and in the first Deadpool you can get away with that because he's a meta character. So he's a meta character, so in that sense it's fine because he knows that he's in a movie, so you can kind of see like, oh, well, then he's an action hero who knows that everything he's doing doesn't really matter. But then in Deadpool 2, the idea that if that's still the case, if we still have to give him a mulligan and say that his murdering doesn't really matter and he knows it, then nothing in the movie that happens should matter to him, right? Well, why then does he care if this kid dies? Why does he care that Cable is trying to kill him? Why does he care about anything that happens in the movie? So you see how it was flimsy logic from the start that we could sort of give a pass. But now it's just sort of going on, and it's something that I'm not expecting a lot from my comedies, my superhero comedies. I'm not expecting the stories to be absolutely thought-provoking. I'm not expecting a movie like I really love, like You Were Never Really Here, which is a more bleak exploration of what violence does to human beings, both the ones who perpetrate it and commit it and the ones who receive it. Another good example would be the show Barry on HBO. That is all about what violence and murder does to human beings and the people around them and the people affected by them. And in those, and Barry, by the way, is a good example because that is a comedy. It still manages to be funny. Now, Deadpool 2, to its credit, it is a self-aware lampooning of fan service, of people. The movie is made for the people who get all of these references and cameos, and that's a lot of like the reward structure of watching this movie. You feel a lot of satisfaction from engaging with the culture, rather than the first one, which was more about the culture itself. It was, or not even the culture itself. It was about the movies themselves. This time, it's about the people who enjoy them. And we could talk all day about ways that the movie does this well. But where it falls apart for me, honestly, is that it's taking what I think is a very sensitive issue. Again, I consider it a tau of fanboyism in the sense that it's an absolute principle. It is this idea that Deadpool 2 is actually suggesting that things can change, that the tau of fanboyism isn't necessarily a tau, that the tau itself is that things can change, that we don't need time travel. We can actually address these problems now, and we can create an environment where in the future, people who are very interested in things, who are big fans of things, just aren't super terrible to each other and to other people. And that is a great vision for a movie. That's the sort of thing that a good comedy can do. It can have an uplifting, positive message. But where it falls apart for me is that part of that toxic fanboy culture is violence, and this is a movie that's still kind of, the phrase has its cake and eats it too. It still thrills you with violence and adrenaline while telling you that those things are sort of bad. And I can see some room for disagreement. Maybe some people will say, well, it's not the violence that's bad. It's not necessarily the killing of, maybe his name is Russell. Now I'm getting it. It's not that the killing of Russell was bad. It was this idea of like killing for the wrong reasons, and this idea of like maybe it was about censorship, which that opens up a lot of weird political stuff that I do not have the bandwidth or the YouTube comments section patience for. So all of that to say, and I don't even know 100% where I'm going with this, that's where this movie sort of falls apart for me as a useful piece of film. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm not saying that I heavily disliked it or anything like that. It's just when the comedy wasn't working for me in Deadpool 2, and a lot of the comedy really worked for me, a lot of it didn't. But when the comedy didn't work for me and all I had was the story, all I had were the characters to fall back on for the enjoyment of this movie, I was left feeling isolated and sort of put on this island of confusion because I just could not put together what Deadpool 2 was trying to say. And just bears repeating. A lot of you are going to be watching this and you're like, well, that's fine. It has kind of, maybe it does have some scattered, confusing, mixed messages, but that's not why I enjoyed the movie. And I suspect if you're in that camp, I don't blame you because maybe it's testament to maybe the humor worked for you a lot better than it worked for me. So I can understand the liking of this film, and even those who consider it better than the original. I don't even know if it's better than the original or whatever. Honestly, I was very bored rewatching the original. So that would take a lot more time to analyze. It would take a lot more of consumption of other opinions on my part. But that's kind of where I come away from Deadpool 2. A sort of, you know, I can't even tell if it had good intentions, I guess. And if the good intentions, I want it to be good intentions. If the good intentions were about, how creators of media can sort of positively interact and help into the redemption of fans who are angry, who are bitter, and who can sometimes like lash out against the creators themselves. I think of The Last Jedi, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and a lot of that backlash, a lot of the hate and vitriol coming from a segment of the Star Wars fandom, sort of throwing itself at Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson got all this vitriol and hate from a segment of the fandom, and I think that ultimately was effective in actually allowing us to kind of see it for what it is, to see that people are being very vicious toward creators who, for reasons that kind of cycle into, I'm going to say this carefully because like there is a sense of like abuse and bullying, I guess, but I think of myself. I think of how when I was growing up, I engaged with certain media, with stories, because not really as always an escape, but as sort of a way because I wanted to connect with people. I always felt like as a kid, I didn't connect with people the way that I wanted to. My deepest fear as a human being is not being understood or for being misunderstood. For someone taking something that I have said or a behavior that I've exhibited and misconstruing it, misinterpreting it, and concluding on bad intentions on my part or concluding that I have done something purposely malicious. That is, if we're getting to the psychology of me, John Negroni, that is my deep fear. And I can understand, and I actually would really appreciate a movie that kind of takes that kind of person, that kind of Russell character who is looking for a sense of belonging and is trying to find it in a creator who wants nothing to do with him. I mean, we look at Deadpool, he has these relationships with other X-Men characters, with other, you could call them celebrities, other people who are kind of superheroes, and he doesn't really have a respect or appreciation for the common man. It doesn't come together perfectly, I admit, especially if you factor in the dead girlfriend, fridge girlfriend stuff. But there is a silver lining there. And maybe that's why I walked away from Deadpool 2 not very satisfied and not liking it as much as I think I should have, because this is the part of the movie that really needed to hit the landing for me to have an experience that was complete, and that was a complete thought really on the movie's part, because I've heard a lot of people say that the post-credit scene is the best thing about this movie, right? Where Deadpool travels through time and just starts killing people. That was where the movie completely lost it, and if anything, it ruined a lot of the movie for me because, well, first of all, it was just kind of confusing because like then with the time travel stuff, I guess like the implication is that none of what we just watched mattered. And if that's the case, like what am I supposed to care about? That was weird. But then also like the idea of just like killing a bunch of people, killing himself over and over again, that just felt like such a step backward from what we had just seen. And I get it. Like the joke is that he was all like, I'm going to die in the end of this movie. And then he has a long death scene that everyone knew wasn't going to last. I guess it's just the jokes, the gags were prioritized by the director and writers over, I think, what would have made this better, which is, I don't know, a good story, a good ending, a good message. I don't want to continue, like, I don't want to steam pile over this movie, but that is just where I'm at, I guess. And who knows where my opinion is going to glide along as I continue to think about this one. But that's where I'm at as I'm dissecting this one. And I want it to be a useful tool in exploring the relationship between creator and fan. But until then, I don't quite think we're going to have that answer. I don't think we're going to get to a place where it makes perfect sense yet. And if you have any takes on Deadpool 2, I want to hear them. I want to I want to continue hearing what other people have to say about it. So I guess that'll do it then for this. On my movie review podcast, I gave the movie a B minus, and I stand by it. A B minus, I think, a lot more positive than I'm probably sounding right now, and that's because I do think that the good in Deadpool 2 somewhat outweighs the bad, but just barely. And yeah, that'll do it for me, I guess. Real quick before you go, I do want to tell you about a book that I wrote. It's right here. It's called Killer Joy. And this is the cover. We did a new cover, and that's kind of why I'm announcing it, and I'm kind of shilling it right now for you guys. But this is Killer Joy. It is a superhero fantasy novel that I wrote last summer. The sequel is coming out this September. The sequel is called Vanguard, and it would make me super happy if you checked it out. And if you like superheroes, fantasy, and some of what we talked about today, actually, a lot of what's in this book actually has to do with, how we engage with superhero culture and fantasy in general. And I'm really proud of it. I love this book, and I'm working on this series and closing it out and everything like that. So be sure to check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. You can find it at Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to find your books, I guess. And if it's not there, you can request it and all that stuff. So that's Killer Joy. There's another cover that's it looks slightly different, but just make sure you get that ER in the title and all that stuff. So all right, that'll do it for me this week. I'll see you guys next time on John and Theory.